And this is something we don't normally do. We normally don't break down the schedule until the next year. But man, there has been so many changes. So Brock and I are here to talk about it. Brock, thank you for joining me on another Tuesday night. How's it going? And how have you been since I've seen you for NASCAR weekend?
No, it's been good. Good. Thank you for having me back on. Yeah, it's been a little bit different this year. I haven't really covered any other races since we met back up at Sears Point, but looking to kind of already look ahead to next year. And actually the schedule and its release is actually yeah, something we were definitely both my brother and I were definitely waiting for to kind of start getting a head start on plans for next season and yeah, eager to talk about it.
I don't even know where to start. I guess should we just start with the obvious fact that the Busch Light Clash is going to Bowman Gray Stadium and kind of what we're going to expect from that. I think it's going to be a lot of the same racing wise of the Coliseum that we've had the last 3 years. But the difference is it's closer for the teams and it's the Madhouse historically. So like, what does it mean to you to have NASCAR back at Bowman Gray, and what do you think that's going to do to kick off the season?
I mean, it's really cool. I mean, I hate to lose the LA event because, something that was so accessible and easy to get to from here in the Bay Area. At the same time, I know that with all the effort they were putting into it and building the track and tearing it down, building it again, that probably wasn't going to be sustainable. So I'm glad to have at least experienced it once. Bowman Gray it has that history element though too, which is nice. And yeah, it used to host Cup Series points races, used to run international manufacturers there back in like the 60s and 70s. And yeah, then as you mentioned, the Madhouse and all of the attention it's received since then for their weekly racing series up there. It should be really cool. I hope that it gets a good turnout. It should. I anticipate people are going to be clamoring for tickets just like were for the first LA Clash down here. But in terms of the racing product itself, yeah, probably about the same. Although I guess the big difference, at Bowman Gray, and I don't know what if NASCAR is going to change this before the event, is, you see a lot of the weekly races, people pulling off into the grass or using that as kind of an escape road or something. Whereas at the Clash, you had the inside section was pretty well, guarded off because it was a temporary track and they tried to use that as like a breakdown lane and stuff. So, potentially in terms of, how crazy it gets, I guess that could be one factor to look at.
I think that a major part of it though is, they NASCAR when they bought the lease to Bowman Gray, I think we could all kind of see this coming, and we all kind of knew. I had been to the LA Clash, you had been to the LA Clash, we both weren't there this year, but we could kind of see that was kind of starting to wind down. So I think this was kind of the obvious conclusion to that, but I think it's a great pivot into the season. So I mean, obviously, like we can go right into the season now. The Daytona 500 does not change. It's the Daytona 500. After that, we go to Atlanta again. But the new change is Coda is the third race of the season. What are your thoughts on road course racing? This is the earliest it's been since Daytona Road Course was in 2021, I believe, to have Coda their third race of the season. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was still muted there. Yeah, no, it shows a lot of willingness to really change the schedule up from one year to the next then. I know that one factor in that was to kind of separate it out from the race at Texas Motor Speedway so that they're not so close together and maybe they don't cannibalize each other's ticket sales there. But I think that yeah, I mean, having it earlier in the year, I mean, I was thinking that, maybe Sears Point was going to be the one that was going to be moved up in this next schedule, if anything. But and I think you were there when we were talking about it.
Mhm.
The concerns over, the unpaved parking areas and everything. If there was rain, as we know, it's so common in
Mhm.
NASCAR and so common in the spring in Bay Area as well, that was going to be a real big mess. And some tracks have handled that pretty well, but maybe some of those options aren't in place as of yet at Sears Point. Which is a shame because the track looked gorgeous. I mean, back when you and I were at the test too. I mean, I think that was a great teaser for how great it could look. I am a bit envious that Coda gets it, but I also see why they were trying it, and it at least adds some kind of aspect to the West Coast swing still too. Kind of even though it's a bit of a longer drive than maybe some of the other venues.
Yeah, and then you know what? What is sad though is that Coda is losing the trucks. They're still going to have the Xfinity and the Cup Series, but they are losing the Truck Series. Which honestly, the trucks have been a show there the last 3 years, however many years it's been going on there. So I don't know. I mean, granted the trucks are going road course racing. We can dive more into that later, but it hurts to lose the trucks there because they've been putting on great shows.
Yeah, it's too bad. And actually, I'd overlooked that. So that's that is an unfortunate change there. But again, I think as you said, there's some other changes on the truck schedule that I think everybody has it would be very right to be very excited about that'll offset that.
Yep, yep. And then we keep moving down the schedule here. Las Vegas stays the same. Phoenix, Las Vegas, that stays the same. But then after that, we go to I believe Homestead. Like
Hmm.
Homestead is coming back into the picture in the spring again. We haven't seen this since 2021 when they were the second race of the year on the Fox portion of the schedule. My gut is that this tells me that they are trying to get the championship race back in 2026 so they can do renovations. But at the same time, it's a good race to have at the beginning of the season. We know hopefully we're not going to be impacted by weather. It's still warm. I mean, I'm kind of looking forward to that early Homestead date. Plus, we've had some upset winners when they've been in the spring. They're one only other time. If you remember, Harrison Burton won that Xfinity race, and then Byron won only a second Cup race in 2021 there.
There you go. Yeah, no, I'm just glad Homestead's on the schedule at all. I mean, it's such a beautiful venue. I haven't covered a race there yet, but definitely intend to one of these days. I've only heard great things about it, and yeah, I'd love to see it go back to being a championship venue. I think especially this current configuration of it is like inseparable from being, late season, if not the last race of the season, and it's put on great shows over the years. I think it's having the championship at a venue that you don't run at an earlier point of the season, it's even better than when it used to be Atlanta. Like when Atlanta would have two dates and you would have the finale there. I think having Homestead be have that unique element and really be kind of intimidating in that sense too. Just how perfect you have to be to get around that track. Yeah, I'd love to see it, but I'm just glad that it's anywhere on the schedule. And yeah, if it goes to gets some renovations for 2026, that would be something I'd definitely be interested in.
Now, once we get to the summer part of the schedule, is where things get really interesting. First of all, Gateway is nowhere to be found in the summer part of the schedule. We will get to that. But hopping in its place, and our date at Sonoma too,
Mhm.
Michigan. Michigan is back in June. I'm looking very much forward to that. Michigan was a good race this year. I don't know really know what to expect. The drivers haven't raced there much in June, but we used to do the June August doubleheader deal. So it's kind of a bit of a throwback to the past. What are your thoughts on how Michigan A replaced our date and B be back on the schedule earlier in the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the June Michigan race, I used to always call it the 400 miles to Sears Point because it was always like the race right before it for many years. But it always seemed like the racing in the June Michigan was always better than the one in the August one. So if it's scaling, but continuing just the one date and then having it, if you got to pick a time to do it, I think that would be great. I've heard the August date tends to be, really hot over there. I guess it's hot everywhere in August, but it seems particularly true up in that neck of the woods there too. But yeah, I think that would be fantastic. And maybe, you're right. It is kind of a different time of the year that maybe a lot of the current drivers haven't competed in there. But it's also kind of a throwback in that sense. I think that's a nice thing with a lot of the changes on this schedule. I think that, that you may hear from some people on social media, especially maybe a lot of older fans are like, oh, NASCAR doesn't care. And they don't listen to the older fans. And it's like, that's not, I don't know where anybody gets that from. Like there's these changes in particular this year. And really, it's not like it just started this year, these last few years, bringing legacy venues in like Bowman
Hmm.
Gray and like a June race at Michigan, and
Hmm.
like some other ones that I'm sure we'll be talking about here
Hmm.
shortly. Yeah, I think those are perfect examples of it.
And on top of that, Nashville is the week before where Worldwide Technology Raceway, I call it Gateway, where
Mhm.
that used to be. So Nashville, oh, it's they've already had a June race before, and it's been hot. I can only imagine how hot it's going to be in the at the beginning of June, but that's going to be some good racing. Nashville has been a show ever since they've been on the Cup schedule. It'll be interesting to see what what it looks like because they haven't raced this early in the year since I can remember as far as with the Cup series. So I don't know. You've watched Nashville Super Speedway with the Xfinity series for years. What are your thoughts on them kind of being that date, but where Gateway used to be?
I mean, it's a pleasant surprise, but yeah, I think that's another date where I think it would be even better to move it earlier in the year, and knowing it's a concrete track that should be able to be dried really quickly if you have if you have bad weather moving in from an earlier date in the season. What I've just heard from Nashville is much like what I heard from Michigan, where it's just like brutally hot there. And we've seen, especially in the Xfinity races the last couple of years, just how exhausted these drivers are getting out of the cars. That's kind of one of the things I'm concerned about for our venue here, which I'm sure we'll be discussing shortly as well. But again, it's I guess right now for some of the things in terms of changing dates rather than venues, it seems like there's small changes right now, but maybe they're really important ones. Maybe that'll turn out to be a significantly better time for them.
Now, the big one on the Amazon Prime schedule, sure, they have the Coca-Cola 600, which is not changing date. It is still the week after the All-Star race and on Memorial Day weekend. But they have Autodome Hermones. Is that how you say it?
The
It is
Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez road course.
yes,
Speak of.
yes, yes,
Yep.
yes. The week after, so it's June 15th. We've got the NASCAR Xfinity and the NASCAR Cup Series going there. I
And the
believe
Mexico
that,
series
yeah, and the
participating
Mexico
too.
Series. How big is this for NASCAR to go international? Like, this is probably the biggest change on the schedule. It's another road course. I know fans aren't into road courses like you and I, but how big is it to them to go international for the first time since Canada before COVID, I believe?
Yep. I mean, it's very exciting. I mean, I had fond memories of when we did Canada right before COVID there, visiting our friend Rob Taylor up there and, checking out the venue. Beautiful facility, beautiful, great fans up there. And I hope that it's the same experience when they come down to Mexico City. I have, I've never even actually been to Mexico myself personally, vacation or racing or otherwise. But I have good memories of watching the Xfinity race there when they had priests come up down the grid and bless the cars with holy water, and Jorge Getters winning the pole. Getters himself competing in the Clash at the Coliseum earlier this year when they had their Mexico Series standalone event earlier this season. Yeah, just a really interesting venue. I think there's a lot of logistical challenges for sure, especially if you're going to have, I mean, back in the past, it was just a standalone event for what's now the Xfinity series. I'm sure they had the Mexico series down there too, of course, for the local drivers. But yeah, now you're going to have the Cup Series guys on top of that. That's going to be, a lot of logistics to figure out, where everybody's going to stay and bringing everybody down there and all their equipment. It's the same, but these aren't new challenges in one way because of course, in the past you had races in Japan or Australia and you had, bringing over much more equipment than you'd think you'd need to. But it should be exciting. It should be interesting to see. I just hope it's a safe race as well. Because it's again, I think that's always the challenge when you're traveling abroad anywhere, really. But I think it'll be interesting. I'm glad that anything that kind of gets the NASCAR brand out there and kind of really, allows more people to see the race that maybe wouldn't be able to, or something like that. I think that's, definitely a positive there. And I think the thing I'm most excited about is I hope we get something kind of like we did back in 05, 06 there, where you get a lot of the local drivers from there getting rides in Xfinity or perhaps even the Cup Series. Are we going to get somebody? I mean, I don't know what Adrian Fernandez is up to these days, or maybe, our driver that caliber, Jorge Getters, others, maybe somebody that's, still active in the Mexico series. It's the standout down there. It'd be great to see. I mean, it might be another, do we have another Shane Van Gisbergen kind of story on our hands there? And that's the fun part too, because we did see that back in the early Busch races there years ago. So hopefully we have something like that this time around.
Well, there's another rumor that's been floating out around there that NASCAR wants Pato O'Ward to run the race. And as we know, he and Daniel Suarez are both from Monterrey, Mexico. Daniel Suarez was the one pushing for this event. He was there at the press conference for that event. How cool would it be to get an IndyCar driver if the logistics work out in a NASCAR car, whether it's Xfinity or Cup? I would hope he'd be able to do both, full double duty, that maybe triple duty. It's not out of the question, but how cool would it be to get Pato Award, and what would that mean for the open wheel kind of, we had Larson do the Indy 500 this year. What would it mean to have Pato Award jump in a NASCAR car possibly in
Oh,
2025?
yeah, it'd be fantastic. I mean, I was kind of surprised we didn't really get more IndyCar drivers involved in the return of the Brickyard 400 this year. Kind of similar to what happened with the inaugural Brickyard, where they had a couple of open wheel guys in that, and not as many as they originally anticipated. Video that myself and NASCAR Man History did recently, covering those stories back then. But yeah, I mean, if you get Pato Award, in there, or anybody really, somebody that again has very different experience in trying their hand at the Cup Series. It seems like, I mean, again, maybe Shane Van Gisbergen, revealed this, or maybe it was just something particular to his own experience or anything like that. I guess that remains to be seen. But we're seeing that, perhaps drivers from other disciplines are adjusting to this car better than they would have in the old car, or or even further back. I mean, I'm so used to growing up and seeing guys like Jacques Villeneuve and other competitors of his caliber, Andy Pilgrim from sports car racing and so forth, come in there. People with tremendous pedigree, but always seem to really struggle in the stock cars. Now we're seeing them, not only doing well, but contending for wins or winning races. Guys like Kimi Räikkönen coming in with the car a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think if you get Pato in there or anybody else of that caliber, it's only going to make the event better.
And you've watched a race at this track. I have never seen that was before my time watching NASCAR. So you're gonna have to explain to me like what the challenges are. Obviously I've seen it's got a lot of elevation. F1 goes there. Kind of talk to me more about what we're getting into here for the newer generation of NASCAR fans.
Sure. No, it was a really exciting event. I always recommend everybody check out. I think before the race starts, and I'm sure NASCAR, or if not their NASCAR Classics page, will probably ramp this up more. I don't know what their plans are exactly, but it'd be great if they posted like a really clear copy of that first race there in 2005, the Truex one. It was a really interesting racetrack. I think that the anticipation through those couple of weeks there, because it was like an off weekend during the Cup schedule, very early in the year. Yeah, I mean, to describe it just from my memory, you have the first half of it is very much kind of like a mid Ohio, Portland maybe kind of aspect there, where you have kind of a lot of grass, a lot of runoff, a lot of different halting twists and everything. Suzuka, I guess, would be another comparison in Japan there as well. And then the back half of it, I recall there was like a Coliseum section, and it had this long curb, and it had these concrete walls that you basically had to hug like right up against there to get back on the main straightaway. And I don't know if this is an current thing. I know that they said that they were going to make some changes versus what Formula One runs on this particular course. But I recall that one of the big controversies back when NASCAR ran there was a long straightaway where the start finish line was, and they put a chicane in after the straightaway, and they put these massive curbs in there. And there were a lot of incidents. I believe Carl Edwards was one of the drivers that was involved in one of these incidents in practice, just absolutely annihilated a car, hitting one of those curbs. And it didn't just upset the balance of it, it just immediately just threw you into the wall. And again, these didn't really have safer barriers back then. I don't know what the logistics of the track are now. I imagine with Formula One, they probably upgraded that. But it used to be a real hard hit back then. So it was a very tricky track. And that was definitely, one aspect of it there. And, we had, again, Jorge Getters, Robbie Gordon, and then some Cup regulars that were in there. And again, a lot of Mexico area drivers as well competing in it that really made it an interesting venue. And I hope we get something close to that this time around.
I would say that this is also to piggyback off of that point. I would say that this is also the trade-off that NASCAR probably proposed to the teams. Okay, we'll go to Bowman Gray for the Clash. We won't send you to LA, but you got to go to Mexico.
Hmm.
So
That was probably the case.
I could totally see how that went down. It's been rumored that that's what it was. I don't have any sources, obviously, but yeah, I think Mexico is going to be a good thing for the sport, and it's a 3-year deal, I believe, is what was reported. So fans better get used to this track because the date may change, but it's always going to be on the schedule. It's kind of probably going to be like Coda at this point. I mean, and all off of that point, it's a fair point to notice that now we've got two F1 tracks on the NASCAR Cup Series circuit.
Hmm.
This is awesome that we have two, that NASCAR is choosing these great road courses. By the way, Coda will also be repaved, but when NASCAR goes there next year, we've been through a repave ourselves, so who knows what's going to happen. But back to that point, it's going to be awesome that we have two F1 road courses on the schedule. I think that proves the innovation that we are in with this era of NASCAR.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. And we'll see. I think what some people have said, I've heard from some complaints about like there being too many road courses now versus all those years where we just had, Sears Point and Watkins Glen. But I think people will find out, and just talk about Mexico City just a minute ago, just how different all these tracks are from each other. They have very different challenges, very different speeds, and very different techniques you need to succeed at them. And I hope that that's going to be something that's going to become very clear once they actually compete at Mexico City.
Yeah, that's an event I'm looking forward to. It'll be on Amazon Prime, people. By the way, we've got new TV broadcasters coming, and we will hit on that all that later where you can find these races. But anyway, after they get back from Mexico City, it goes Pocono and then Atlanta. Atlanta will be moving back to the end of July, and then it's the end of June, and then we got the Chicago Street Race. And that's I'm glad that that's coming back. But if you are into road and street courses, this is the part of the schedule that is for you because after the Chicago Street Race, it is the one that affects us the most, Brock. Sonoma is moving to July 13th. How hot is it going to be? This is the latest the Toyota Seymour 350 has ever been run. What are we going to expect from this race weekend?
It's gonna be very hot. I would say that anybody that's planning on attending to it, and I hope people do. I hope this doesn't turn people away because July is also the same month that Sonoma holds their drag racing event, which is I'd say just as if not more popular than the NASCAR event on their current schedule. So they have fans come out to that now. Parts of that are at night, which help as well, but. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, and we've seen challenges with heat exhaustion before with these drivers and teams. I think that it could be a real challenge, and the pavement's still relatively new from the new pavement this year. That could still throw people some curveballs next season. It's always been a very demanding road course in that sense. I still maintain that even among the current road courses on the schedule, it's still probably the closest that NASCAR comes to doing like an off-road rally, just because of how unforgiving the track is and how massive the elevation changes are at the track as well. Watkins Glen may be quicker, but that's more of a cage match with how close those barriers are to the track surface. But Sears Point is definitely going to be very physical, and I think even more so with it being that much warmer out. Now, fortunately, a lot of the fan amenities have improved so much over the years, especially in terms of shade structures and trees and extra facilities for people to get drinks and everything there. I think that for the fan experience, it should be just fine. But I think for the drivers where you don't have the benefit of all that, yeah, that's going to be a bit of a struggle for sure.
Now, we've been going to NASCAR races both as fans and as media at Sonoma Raceway for years. This is the latest the Toyota Seymour 350 has ever been run.
Mhm.
And the track is saying that it could help with because school's out at that point. Think about it. Like it's in July. But before
Yeah.
that, like the big thing was last year, like my school district here in town, I cover high school sports, by the way. That's a side note. Season high school football just started. But anyway, high school the schools were still in last year when we had our race weekend. I hope that this is maybe a bump in attendance also, like what we shall see. But I mean, May we've ran this event. We've had it any time in June, it seems like, and now we go
Mhm.
to July. So July is going to be very interesting. And on top of that, NHRA, as you mentioned, Brock, comes 2 weeks later. So I'm very curious. And this is a teaser to next year, sometime in June. It won't be May, when we get Brian Flynn on to discuss this move. How the logistics are going to work, having the two major series in 3 weeks. Like that's going to be crazy, and I don't think it's something the track has ever experienced before. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to have NASCAR in July.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're a hard-working bunch there over at Sonoma Raceway, and yeah, they're going to definitely have their work cut out for them on that. But I'm sure they're up to the task.
July is going to be such a busy month for me. I'm going to NHRA next year too, so it's
Well,
going to be a
fantastic.
busy yeah, it's going to be a busy month. And then on top of that, let's move on from the schedule. We can always come back to Sonoma. We'll have a lot more on that in 2025. We'll bookmark this right here for Sonoma. But and then Dover follows us at Sonoma before the Brickyard. Like I think that Dover moving to July is great. We've had so many rain races when they've been in April or May or whenever they've been. If they can get it in a clean race, granted it may be hot. It's going to be an issue everywhere in the summer stretch, but Dover in the summer has put on good shows before. Remember when it was back in the playoffs? Like I think this is a great move for that track.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's worked for New Hampshire when they had a July date and everything, and I know that there's been issues with rain at that track as well at different times. When that's been moved around since then. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly worth a try, and we find out what it's going to be. Another track that's very physical and demanding and everything, and lends itself to long green flag runs. But I think regardless, it should be a good show.
I liked Dover. It's the Monster Mile this last year. I mean, the races there in the next gen era have been really good. I'm hoping that we just don't face the rain issue, but and then after that we go to the Brickyard. The Brickyard 400 is back again. I This was a very entertaining race this year. What are your thoughts on the Brickyard? 2 weeks after Sonoma, this is bizarre.
It
Like,
is. It is. Having that close to the schedule. I always remember those as being two very different phases of the schedule there, especially back when Sears Point was still like the first road course of the season, despite being basically at the halfway point of the year. Obviously that's significantly changed since then. But yeah, I'm glad the Brickyard 400 stayed on the schedule. I hope they don't go back on that at all because I think, yeah, I agree. I think this year's event was very entertaining. Yeah, there was some controversy at the end, but with that late race restart there. And then I think the more compelling controversy was the lack of a caution that was timely thrown there with Ryan Priest's spin on the final lap. But I do think that the Brickyard 400 signature event. I think it's time to really recognize and celebrate its own unique history to the speedway as well. And it used to be that was really the crowning ceremony for whoever was going to eventually be the series champion, at least under the full season format. With the exception of Ricky Rudd or Bill Elliott in those first few years, it seemed like just about every year it was somebody that was going for the championship, or at least somebody that was in close contention for it. It'll definitely be something interesting to see, and I like that they brought out a lot of the people that started the first Brickyard, including Rick Mast and Bobby Hill and some other Hut Strickland and some other guys out there. So that was cool to see. And I hope that that continues.
well, NASCAR's Four Crown Jewels, their dates for the majority of the time did not change. Like that's good. But I think each one, and this is worth noting out since we just had the Southern 500, each one shows you whether you're a championship contender. The Daytona 500 is survival. The Coke 600 is just lasting in NASCAR's longest race. The Brickyard 400, it takes a little bit of everything, but Kyle Larson got it done this year. Like, you got to have a good car, you got to have a good crew. Like, you got to do a lot of things there. And it's a place where champions have won in Indianapolis. Just think Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt. It tells you who can win a Cup Series title or Winston Cup, however far back you want to go. And then you got the Southern 500, which is another physical track in the middle of August or late August, early September, where you got to be the best of the best to win. And we just got a surprise winner there in Chase Briscoe, but he earned that win. So
Yep.
if you can win any of those four races, you clearly have a good team and you should be in the NASCAR playoffs. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think a Southern 500 in particular, I think is one of the key measures of drivers' success and also their legacy too. I think nobody backs into a win in the Southern 500, or Darlington really in general. It's had some races with some late race reversals of fortune, but as you mentioned with Chase Briscoe, yeah, he was up there the entire night. He had a fantastic run in both stages. He had a great run in qualifying. He was lurking there the whole time. And he made the aggressive move when he had to in the closing stages, and that ended up being the deciding factor there at the end, especially in a race that Kyle Larson had dominated so thoroughly, and and other drivers there too. That's why I think Eric Jones is probably one of the more unappreciated drivers in the Cup Series there with his two wins in that event. It's very challenging circumstances and winning them. Not only that, we're winning them with different teams. Kind of Bobby Allison style there. So yeah, I mean, you go to that track and they have a beautiful display in the museum off the backstretch that has models of every single Southern 500 winner. And you look at that list and there may be some surprises in there, especially if you look at kind of the series older history. But every last one of them earned their way to victory lane. And that's, I think that's the important thing that, is a measure of those drivers in the sport's history.
And it's also worth noting that the spring date will be the throwback weekend next year, and in the playoffs will again after this year not it being the playoff cut date it will now be the first race of the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs in 2025. which leads me into the second part of this, where the second race we left to wondering about Worldwide Technology Raceway. It's coming to the playoffs, and I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that there's no NFL team, but also Gateway puts on great racing. And they're getting the Xfinity Series back. This is one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to is Gateway in the playoffs. I know people aren't for it, but I'm actually aren't necessarily all liking it, but I love the move.
I think it's a good decision. I mean, and also kind of it brings back to when we had the two New Hampshire dates, and you had a 300-mile race in there too. I mean, unless they're changing the distance, I don't know if that's changed.
I
But
don't think so.
Gateway is kind of a sprint race, at least on the schedule this year, and so I anticipate that's probably going to be pretty intense for that event there. So we'll find out. And I agree. I think it's put on some good races. It's had some unpredictable moments. Certainly, Austin Cindric's win this past summer here was one of the many moments that kind of turned the current system on its head a little bit and
Hmm.
exposed it to some criticism as well as celebration at the same time. But yeah, I think it's one thing that'll be it's an intriguing decision. I think it was probably the one I was most surprised about, but as you described, I think it does make sense in the long term.
And then the other change in the playoffs, there's three new tracks added in the playoffs. We've got Darlington, obviously one of them because it wasn't a playoff track. We've got Gateway. The other one is New Hampshire's back in the playoffs. We already touched on this that they've been a playoff date in the past. I think it's New Hampshire puts on a good race when it's in the playoffs. These last few years have been kind of just stale to me. I love that now New Hampshire's back in the playoffs. It's another driver's track. You got to qualify. You got to do everything well, and you should because it's that point in the season where it's the round of 12. Like you got to be doing everything right. So, what are your thoughts on having New Hampshire back in the playoffs?
I think within the context of the entire stretch of the playoffs, if you now have three races that are approximately 300 miles each between Gateway, New Hampshire, and the Phoenix finale, you got to be really good in the short term in these races. Like there's going to be no margin for error at all. I mean, some of these longer races, 400 and particularly 500 miles. If you have some kind of problems at the beginning, you get a little bit of damage or a mechanical issue, you could potentially come back from that. But in those short distance races, you have to be absolutely flawless in every aspect of it. And to have three of those, and they're in, I mean, obviously the championship's its own round, but New Hampshire's in a separate round from Gateway, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. So I mean, you're going to have one race in each of those first couple of rounds there, and then the championship on top of it, where you're just not going to have that. You're not going to have that. Bit of a mulligan to work with, and I think that's going to favor probably some of these newer, younger drivers that are used to just being go-getters and getting all they can in a short, truck or Xfinity Series race, and that may be who we end up seeing raise a trophy next year.
And then the last change of this whole Cup Series schedule is and I don't know what to make of this. Talladega going to the round of eight. It's the race after Las Vegas. It goes Las Vegas, Talladega, Martinsville. I don't know what to make of this. I feel like they're putting it a little too close for comfort to me. I don't, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's good to have like probably one of every kind of
Hmm.
discipline at the least in there. So probably if it wasn't going to be Talladega, it was going to be Daytona or an Atlanta, brought thrown in there too. But yeah, I agree. Putting in the round of eight, I think, is the one that definitely raises eyebrows mostly because it's like, okay, somebody who wins that race, if they're playoff eligible, is going to go to the championship, and is that what NASCAR wants to do? I mean, maybe, I guess, but again, I'm not a big fan of the current playoff system. I've
Hmm.
already bent everybody's ear about that, but I think that I mean that maybe that'll be the moment that'll be like, okay, well, wait a minute, maybe we went a little too far in a few places. So we'll see. But I mean, it's gonna be a heck of a show, I'll tell you, one
It's
way or
all
the other.
It's also worth pointing out that I believe the fall Talladega date has had many numerous first-time winners and
It has.
non-playoff winners. So maybe that's their hope here too. I mean, if there is any positive, is that we could get, somebody get their first win like a Harrison Burton or,
Mhm.
somebody that we weren't expecting to win a race during the season. And it changes their season right as we're finishing up the year. So yeah, and then we go Martinsville and then Phoenix. So that's the whole Cup Series schedule. Some of these changes will coincide with Xfinity and trucks, but now we're going to dive deeper into the lower series. And we are going to begin with what I believe is going to be one of my favorite weekends. Sure, it's on Easter.
Mhm.
The Rock is back with the trucks in the Xfinity series, Brock. what does it mean to have Rockingham back within the NASCAR Truck and Xfinity Series?
Well, it's very exciting. I mean, it's a little bit of trepidation because we've been through this before when they had the Truck Series standalone event with ARCA a couple years ago, and it seemed like it was doing pretty well. You had what I think it was Casey Kane winning in the trucks, and you had an ARCA field that just had a giant a car count in that and everything, and it seemed like things were going the right direction. And then boom, it was just right back off the schedule again, and the parking lots were overgrown by the time my brother and I were driving by there in 2017. It's to have lost it off the schedule once after a dramatic photo finish between Matt Kenseth and Casey Kane back in 2004, and then to lose it a second time where Kane basically got his retribution in the Truck Series race there. It's I hope that it stays. I think everybody's probably hedging their bets that after this year they're going to add a cup date back to it and do a triple header there. I'm sure just like with Nashville, they're probably just exploring the option and seeing, okay, we'll do it with Xfinity and trucks, see if that's really crazy popular, maybe we'll expand it. But yeah, I mean, this year's event, I mean, this next year's event is the one that's going to really have to be supported because otherwise, I don't think that's going to even be possible if this doesn't get good attendance. So I am a bit nervous there at the same time. But that nervousness is also mixed with the excitement because, of course, it's a legacy track. You got all the famous names carved into the rock in front of the track. It's hosted so many dramatic moments. Benny Parsons, a dramatic recovery from a big wreck at the beginning to ultimately clinch his championship. All the way to the field fillers competing in there in 2004. And everything in between. I mean, Dale Earnhardt clinching his seventh championship in that battle over Rick Mast. Ward Burton winning his first race out there. So many moments and many more in between. I think Curtis Turner won his first race out there in the inaugural after he was banned for life from the sport initially, and then came back and won that race right away. It's an important track to have on the schedule, and again, it's a tremendous gesture, I'd say, by NASCAR, even to just have Xfinity and trucks there. Because if you look at the calendar, I mean, somebody else put this all on a map and you see that they
Mhm.
have so many more venues in North Carolina again, which is kind of like the way the schedule used to look more or less back in late 90s, early 2000s. So I hope that it goes well. I hope that it gets supported. I'd love to cover it myself if I can make that work. That's one of the events we're looking at for next year. And we'll see what happens.
I I um I know of The Rock. I've maybe watched one race there back when they did it in the 2010s, maybe. Anyway, but the best memory I have of The Rock is from your Rise of the Field Fillers when Steve Park got that win the week after Dale Earnhardt died. It was such an emotional win. He needed that win, and he said that Dale was telling taught him how to drive that place. Like there's so many good memories coming back. Like, sure, that was a sad one off of Dale Earnhardt's death, but Steve Park, he had an up and down career, so it's good to have The Rock back for that reason because all these stories can come back.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was a great healing moment too for Park to win that race. I mean, it you definitely mixture of the sadness in there at the same time, but I think it was a good moment that the sport kind of pulled together in that moment, and then ultimately, of course, began the season that the rest of the season is and how it played out.
And I believe we've already touched on the other changes. Autodome, yep. Sonoma moves, Indy moves. They're going to Worldwide Technology for the first time. Oh, Portland.
It's good to see.
Portland Portland is in August. This is going to be fun. And we've been accustomed to the NASCAR Xfinity teams coming out here to go to Portland and then race at Sonoma back-to-back weeks. Now they got to do two trips out to the West Coast. What is this? The logistics of this are going to hurt them. But I
It's gonna
love
be
that
tricky.
Portland still stays on the schedule, even if its date moves a little bit. Like that has been good racing, and maybe I'll get some more eyes on that track because it has been quietly putting on some good racing. And your guy Ben Schneider knows about this. He's been to all the races up there, so
Yeah.
I'm sure that he's excited about this, even if the date does shift a little bit.
Oh yeah. No, and I'm sure he's excited about it with next year too. I don't know what his plans are for next season, but yeah, I mean, it's a cool track. I always remember it in the truck series as kind of looking like a go-kart track because the elevation changes are so much more even there. But just a really really fun and really competitive venue, and I think it's put on some great racing there, and yeah, has its own unique history in the sport, and also for a region in the country that doesn't at least have any NASCAR, national sanction races up there, at least not the top three series. I mean, undoubtedly, it has its own unique racing history, drivers from that area and other local tracks up there. But to get that exposure up there at the same time, especially TV exposure, I think that's fantastic, and I hope that that stays on there.
I wonder if NASCAR is maybe dipping their foot in the water about bringing a Cup Series race up there. I mean, granted, somebody would have to lose a race, but that's a way for them to get the Canada market at least. Like they're kind of close to Canada, so we'll see. That's one that I'm keeping my eyes on. But now we got to move to the Truck Series, and this is where a ton of stuff changed.
Mhm.
Uh, let's see here. The first with the Truck Series is that let's see, they are going to the Rock, yes. They're going racing at Wilkesboro, but Lime Rock Park. Lime Rock Park. This is a road course that I am not very familiar with, Brock. Do any of us have any idea what the trucks are going for here?
It's a gorgeous track from what I hear. I have a few people that have been contacting me about just how excited they are about that event there in a region that, yeah, I mean, right near, Dover, New Hampshire, and the New England area there, getting another venue and a road course, no less. You look at some old K&N East races there and so forth. And again, it kind of gives me that mid Ohio kind of feel there, maybe a little bit more, flowing corners and whatnot. You see some sports car racing there. That's exciting. I'm still brushing up on the history of it myself, but what bits I've seen of it, including I think NASCAR Man History posted this, that Ryan Truex is actually a past winner at Lime Rock from his experience in the East Series there as well. So I would imagine that maybe he finds his way into a truck for that race there too. So that would be something interesting to see. Yeah, it's another, again, another unique track that I think, kind of talking about the other road courses before and how they have different personalities. I think this will be another interesting one to add. It seems like whenever the discussion of adding a road course to the schedule came up, that Lime Rock always had some, some really ardent fans out there promoting it. It's like, why don't we go here? Why don't we go here? And to see that they've actually done this, even for just a truck series race, I think that's going to be something really unique. And I'm glad the truck series has that. And on top of this, I mean, I'm sure you touched on this here too, all these playing a hand into expanding the Truck Series schedule back to the largest it's been since I believe 2011 with 25 venues. So that's going to be really exciting to see.
Speaking of expansion, they're also going to the Roval in the playoffs. We're gonna have a triple header weekend at the Roval. The trucks already put on a show, but seeing these young kids tackle the Roval is gonna be something out of this world, I'm sure.
That's going to be very physical. I'm still not. I kind of expected the Roval to kind of play itself out by this point. To be perfectly honest, I mean
Same.
it's had some fun moments, and I know having it in the playoffs, is it's almost too much because it's just so bizarre. I don't think anybody's been able the drivers have been able to enjoy the racecraft of competing at the Roval because they just put it in the playoffs and you just got to go in there and throw elbows and get your stage points and get your race win and move on. And I think that's you know either that's sold the event kind of short or that's just kind of inseparable from its identity at this point. Maybe bringing the trucks up there is going to be something that'll shake that up a little bit, but it's still going to be in the playoffs for the trucks too, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, it's gonna be a little crazy. I know the NASCAR wants to have as many crazy venues in the playoffs as possible, and not to say that the regular season ones are gonna be snooze fest, far from it, but it's I'm afraid I'm not the biggest fan of the Roval. It was a fun, cool idea to try at the time, but with all these new things that they're trying out and other things that they haven't yet tried out that I think would be maybe something that comes down the pipe. I wouldn't be all that sad if the Roval was lost because of bringing any one of those in.
You mentioned that the Roval has kind of overstayed its time, like that we thought it would last. It's going to be in year number 5 next year, I believe. I think the first year was the COVID year, right? Or was it 2019?
I
2019.
I think it might have even been 2018,
Oh,
wasn't it? Yeah,
2018, yes. Yeah, 7
really,
years?
it's been a
20.
long
Wow.
time.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
whenever was
crazy
the
to
first
me.
year that? Yeah, so I think Jimmy had that spin with Truex.
Yeah, that was
He was
2018.
still sponsored by Lowe's that year. It wasn't the first year with Ally. So
And that was the 78 car if you really want to go back in time to all these
yeah,
NASCAR
there you go. Exactly. You
fans.
still had Furniture Row back then. So yeah, that's true.
But yeah, and then actually that's all the schedule changes across all the three national series. Now, Brock, since we're here and we chat NASCAR, we kind of did this for the Sonoma race weekend. We should probably catch up on what's been going on there because there's been a ton that's went on the last just 2 weeks. We mentioned Chase Briscoe, but Harrison Burton got his first career win. These we when we got back from the Olympic break, these last five races have been crazy since we've gotten back from the Olympics. Like what do you think NASCAR has found off of the Olympic break to where now that every race is like must watch?
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that the sanctioning body would love for it to keep going. I mean, it's certainly been trending more on social media. It seems like the crowds have been great. The crowds at Darlington was sold out. Daytona looked really good. It's good to see. I mean, anything that's good for the sport, I'm going to be a fan of there. And again, as I said, I'm not a big fan of the playoff system. I think that these last two winners in particular would be exciting and fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the point system is. It's unfortunate. If anything, the point system I think is kind of taken away from that a lot in terms of the discussion of it, because everybody's like, oh, why are they in the playoffs? They shouldn't be in
Mm-hmm.
there because they're this far down the standings. But both of them have been, I think these last two races in particular have been outstanding. Yeah, Harrison Burton getting the win with his father in the booth, very much like Ned Jarrett calling Dale home, and then you have Dale Jarrett there to remind us of that and think back to that memory, and then having it be the Wood brothers on top of it, which Jarrett won his first race with in '91. And yeah, Jeff Burton, celebrating a pumping his fist just like he did when Harrison won that Texas Xfinity race back in 2020. And to cap it all off, I think the other thing that people should be very excited about is these first couple of weeks with Lee Diffie in the booth there doing the broadcast call. I think he has been pitch perfect in the booth here. With all due respect to Rick Allen and all the work he's put in, especially over this last decade, and I'm sure they'll find a good spot for him somewhere in there. But you really don't know what's missing or what's not there until you maybe try somebody different. I applaud NBC and USA for trying that and bringing him in there because I think Lee is also brought out the best of the others in the booth there. I mean, certainly Jeff that night in the Daytona race, whoever was going to be in there was going to be helpful for him in that moment. But Steve Letarte there as well. I feel like they offset each other quite well. So I think that's going to be exciting for the rest of this season and whatever the next moments are going to be.
You make a great point about Lee Diffie. During the Olympics, I remember tweeting because I watched the Olympics because we had no NASCAR, but I was watching the track and field stuff, and I just remember how exciting he made that stuff sound. And it's like, it's track and field. Like, nothing against track and field, but Lee Diffie is making me way more interested in it. And then he comes to NASCAR, and it's just been great. Like, not that Rick Allen did anything bad. He did
No, nothing
a
bad.
fair
It's just different.
he did a fair job, but Lee Diffie's energy has just been so welcome. Like
Yeah.
it's changed the broadcasting. We've needed that energy. It's something that the Fox booth lacked. It's something that, NBC has lacked. Like Lee Diffie has really changed the broadcast scene, and I think that is going to get more eyes, hopefully for the playoffs. We shall
I
see.
and I hope so because and again, I don't mean any disrespect to Rick Allen either because I think again there's been a long history. People again very accomplished in NASCAR or been long time people in broadcasting. Richard Petty wasn't very good in the booth. Ernie Irvin wasn't very good in the booth. I mean, these are other people that are but that doesn't mean that they're any less as commentators too. But you need to have that chemistry there, and you also and I think you know, I think the other thing is when you're the main play-by-play guy, you need to just grab the moment for what it is, and you need to make it feel as big as it needs to be. And not everyone can do that. That's not an easy thing. And I think even people with a lot of experience maybe don't quite capture that. But you're right with Lee Diffie. The one thing I think that's a negative with him being in here is I hate it that the IndyCar is losing him because I
Mhm.
think he's done so much for the Indy 500 and I mean the IndyCar series in general, but the Indy 500 in particular. He's been a perfect follow up to the likes of Jim McKay and Bob Jenkins and Paul Page and everybody else that have made that event as big as it should be. I mean, not every moment needs to be at that level, and Lee knows this because
Mhm.
you sense this even from this last week where Kyle Larson dominated a lot of that event. But when things stepped up and Briscoe's making that move, he's like right on it. And you know that this isn't just, you're not just watching traffic go by. You know that this is something really important that's happening and you're told why it's important. And, that just, again, I've always said, you can have a lot of broadcasts, a bad broadcast is going to kind of distract from the action. A kind of an okay one, it's not going to distract or add anything to it. But a great one, it just makes it part of the
Hmm.
experience. And after that, part of the experience, and after that Harrison Burton win, I must have watched that clip of the last lap over and over again because that the here comes Harrison Burton. It was just like that
Hmm.
that moment in Formula One where it's like, through goes Hamilton, like they did that. What was that? I don't follow Formula One as closely, but I saw that clip so many times and I was like, that's fantastic. If I could bottle that and just say, yeah, this is what we need. That's great because I think it's just been the one missing piece. And again, the sport's been doing great. It's been growing, in the right directions there. And you see it in the ticket sales. I think everybody that had a role in that up to this point deserves that credit. But I still think that the sport on top of that is a sleeping giant. I don't think it's really reached its full potential. And we're down to the little things at this point. It's little things like, how what the camera's looking at, what the play-by-play person's
Hmm.
saying. They fine-tune those little things. We can be back to, something close to where we were in the late 90s. Doesn't mean you have to be bigger than football. That may never happen. But, it could at least be back to kind of that level.
One thing I also want to point out from the Daytona Coke Zero Sugar 400 win for Harrison Burton was the professionalism that Jeff Burton showed throughout the whole time when Lee was saying that that it was under review and everything. Like his mic was off, he was being quiet. It was the Latart and Diffie show.
Yep.
I admire that. Like he could have easily been celebrating, and I don't think I would have faulted him for it. But
Oh,
the
nobody
prof-
would have.
the professionalism that Jeff Burton showed in that moment should not be overlooked either.
No.
Sure, Lee Diffie made the moment great, but Jeff Burton's professionalism made it even better.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. I mean, you think back to the Ned Jarrett and Dale Jarrett thing, and Ned wasn't the main play-by-play guy, just like Jeff Burton wasn't in this case here. And Ken Squire kind of stepped aside and let Ned Jarrett kind of call that finish there. But and that could have happened in this case, and maybe there are a couple pauses there on that last lap. And maybe Lee was kind of just leaving something open in case he wanted to jump in on that. But once he didn't, and Lee just kind of kept that going there. Yeah, he did it. I mean, he did it really just perfectly. I guess with the big difference between 93 in that sense is Jarrett was already leading before the white flag, whereas Harrison just took the lead going into three. And I think everybody was just so stunned that somebody just had to say something. And thank goodness Lee was there to do it. But yeah, I mean, Jeff Burton's professionalism, I wouldn't have faulted him at all if he said anything in there. I mean, he was certainly in position to, but you knew again, just like it was exactly the same way he handled it when Harrison won that Xfinity race over Gregson. Same situation, last corner, last lap, zipping right by him there. He just kind of did that big fist bump there. And yeah, that was really cool. And he got his moment. And I'm glad the broadcast knew to stay with it and share in that moment too. I think that the production side on NBC has always been superior than the Fox production, especially in these last few years. But that really came into focus in that one too. It's just perfect.
That was just an all around great moment,
Beautiful, beautiful.
and the one person, and this is another storyline. Kyle Busch has finished second in the last two races. He did not make the NASCAR playoffs for the first time since 2012.
Yep.
He's got a 19-year winning streak on the line. Do we think he gets it this year? I mean,
He
there's only 10
could.
races left.
He could. And again, this is another consequence of the playoffs. If it weren't for the playoffs, we could just keep that story going. But I'm afraid, once these playoffs start, and even with Diffie at the helm here, the story is just gonna be playoffs, 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 eliminations, cut lines, who's won, winning you're in. That's just gonna be the story the rest of this year. And I think Kyle Busch trying to extend that streak, it'll be overlooked a bit. Even in 2020, or what was that? The year with the,
Yeah.
the mist at the Texas, where he almost didn't win that year, and then he won the
Hmm.
last couple of races. That race had other problems that maybe kind of concealed that story a bit there. But even for as big of a story as Kyle Busch is, I feel like that's not going to be given its proper due down the stretch. I'd love to be wrong about that. Maybe it will. It seems like they've mentioned it certainly every week since the Olympic break returning. Is like, okay, is he going to win? Is he going to win? Like, but that's just kind of the situation there. But I do, to answer your question, I think he could. I think it's just whether I think that if he does, I have a feeling that the way that these races are broadcast now, they're going to be completely caught off guard when it does happen. They're like, "Oh no, we want," it's like this guy was going to punch his ticket to the playoffs, and instead it's going to be a spoiler, and they'll just be like, where did this come from? But I mean, as you mentioned, Kyle's been closing here for the last few weeks here, the runner-up finishes their last couple weeks. Yeah, he could very easily punch, do that next week in Atlanta. So
And not to mention he was involved in that photo finish at Atlanta the last time we were there.
yeah,
Um, but like Kyle Busch, he's love him or hate him, the guy has had a Hall of Fame career. So I want the streak to
undoubtedly.
continue. I really want the streak to continue. And honestly, I think that if he does get a win, I hope it's handled kind of like, the Riley Herbst situation in Vegas was last fall, because
Yeah.
that would be great. Because, sure, it's not his first career win, but a win this season would be great. And it's Kyle Busch. He deserves to be celebrated. Sure, he didn't make the playoffs, but that point aside, he's a legendary driver, one of the best of my lifetime for sure. So yeah, that's very interesting. Speaking of the playoffs, we got Atlanta this week. Like Atlanta to start the playoffs is it was out of necessity with the schedule, so they could keep the Southern 500 on Labor Day, but two super speedways in the playoffs is going to be interesting, especially for a guy like Kyle Larson, who isn't the best super speedway racer. We got it. It's just going to be very interesting.
It
And
will. Yep. And oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and I was going to say that Watkins Glen is after, so that's the only change
Hmm,
there. Anyway.
too. But yeah, I mean, I think the Atlanta. I'm going to be very interested to see what the response is going to be to Atlanta after this weekend, because I think everything's very high after this one in the spring with a three wide photo finish. And yeah, that was crazy. It was a crazy. I still maintain, as I said in a video earlier this year, that it was a fantastic finish to a very sloppy and messy race.
Hmm.
With whether it had a record size pile up in the first few laps, and then caution after caution. I think that, and I still think, as I said in that same video, that Atlanta made a fantastic case for itself to be the host of the All Star race,
Hmm.
because that's basically what that was, a series of 20 lap sprints. And then you have a caution, and then, you're going to have a crazy finish because you got super speedway racing at a track that's not really designed for it, but they've tried to shoehorn it in there. And I would much rather see an all star race at Atlanta and a 400 lap race in North Wilkesboro. But I don't know how many other people feel that way, but I think that would be the most sensible decision from this. But we have it as the start of the playoffs here, and it's going to be another points paying race. And the reason I think I'm going to be interested in this is I think the odds of us having a finish quite like what we saw in the spring races probably pretty slim. It may end under caution after like multiple restarts. It may have a winner that's not as popular. I mean, I think the other thing that was a factor in that win was Daniel Suarez is, I still view him as like this generation's Ricky Craven, that he's a driver that nobody really dislikes. Like
Hmm.
everybody just, they like his story. They like how humble he is. And, and he's from an area that's not common in, at least in the Cup series. I think, and which is great. I think that's cool. But this race here may not have any of those elements, and or people are going to still be like, well, I mean, it was still a fantastic race, but it's like I think that's the tricky part when you have a finish that's quite that good, is now are people are going to be expecting that every time they come back there? Because I remember right after that race, everybody's like, oh man, it's going to be in the playoffs. It's going to start the playoffs. And it's going to be the exact same thing. And it's going to do the same way. And it's going to be this. And it's like, you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you think
Hmm.
that. Like it could suck. It could very easily. So I'll be interested. I mean, I feel like I'm sitting on the sidelines when it comes to that, because I don't really have that much of a preconception on that. I think my more immediate concern is my brother and I have been doing our fantasy picks this year, and neither of us have picked a single winner this entire year. So, I'm just kind of thinking of that more than anything. But we'll find out. Find out. I'll be very interested what the Monday morning headlines are going to be on this.
It's just very interesting to me because I think Atlanta is maybe in its prime right now. Each year the track surface ages, and each more it kind of starts to go back to a traditional mile and a half that we're kind of used to. So
Mhm.
like, how much longer are we really gonna have this super speedway racing? Like, that's my biggest concern. Like,
Well, as long as NASCAR keeps that package on the cars, I mean, they're going to, force them to run, a super speedway package and not run any practice. I mean, they could probably force them to run that way, even if the track changes too much to, make that workable anymore. At least it feels that way to me.
I'd rather, I liked old Atlanta, but I mean, this new Atlanta is Frankenstein, as Dale Earnhardt Jr. put it last year. It's just a Frankenstein track where nobody knows what to expect.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what they want in the playoffs. And sure, it's in the round of 12, but I don't know. I'll be glad next year when it's not in the in the playoffs. So yeah, and then we go to Watkins Glen in the playoffs, which is another new one. Like that's going to be a good race. Watkins Glen was always a must-watch race. It's the super
Yeah.
speedway road courses. Where when we used to have Sonoma and Watkins Glen on the schedule, that's a
Sure.
super speedway road courses, and it always puts on a show.
I've always been a big fan of Watkins Glen. I mean, it's definitely one that I've circled on my calendar, since the early years. Even it's one where even qualifying in practice is exciting to watch. I was kind of going through some of my archives of stuff I've recorded on DVD over the years, and a lot of that stuff is Watkins Glen, just because I knew, whether it was the Xfinity series or the Cup series or even the times when the Truck series ran there, it was always must watch TV. I will admit that just thinking about it off the top of my head, I can't remember too many moments from the last couple of cup races there. I know there was that one time that Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson ran into each
Yes,
other, and everybody made a big thing out of that. It's like, oh, they don't like each other. And it's like, okay, we're gonna do this again. Like, but it's like, in terms of like what the strategy was or like, crazy moments like that, I don't remember them as clearly. I just remember Hendrick teams just crush this track every year. I think Kamikaze Games just did a video on this and said the same thing. And it's like, okay, great. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you got I mean, I think this year it's probably Kyle Larson's to lose. William Byron maybe, but it's gonna be tough. If it's somebody other than them, it seems like ever since Chase Elliott won there, which was a good race, that's probably the last good race I can really remember there. And I'm a bit biased there because I was actually there that year that happened in 2018. But these last few I just don't remember very clearly.
you mentioned the last two winners there, William Byron and Kyle Larson have won the last two races there, and then our cutoff race is Bristol. And unfortunately, during this weekend, I will be at golf. That's the weekend I have the golf tournament.
Oh,
So
right on.
but yeah, we have a golf tournament here in Napa, the Procore Championship. It's in its 11th year.
Oh,
But
live sports are always better than TV sports, so
but
I get it.
yeah, I've been going every year, but I'll be keeping an eye on what's going on in Bristol. I never miss Bristol. So like I love that Bristol's a cutoff race. Bristol, the night race is the event at Bristol, let's be honest. It being in the playoffs is fine by me. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, but
Yeah, it's
Bristol in
fine.
the first round is going to be a good race.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I mentioned this in another video recently that I always viewed Bristol, even when you had a full season championship, I kind of viewed Bristol as the not really thinking about a regular season and a playoffs, but I mean, kind of the shift where the focus went, the focus on the championship really started to build was like after Bristol, because you had like that as a crazy race, but then you had the Southern 500, and like we were just talking about earlier, much like Indianapolis as well. That's an event that really champions win. It's an event that really kind of separate. If maybe it's a close championship after Bristol because some crazy stuff happens. Southern 500 the very next week, the champion, the person that's a favorite for the championship makes a statement, wins the race, maybe doubles their point lead, and then from there, that's what the race is. That's the way it always kind of felt to me. So, I mean, having it in the playoffs now, I mean, the paradigm is so different these days. I don't mind it in there because I know it's in there for for other reasons and stuff. And
Ratings,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, ratings. And it's going to be, yeah, you want to have as many crazy races and in the playoffs as possible. Yeah. So, they're going to find if they could make every race in the playoffs Bristol, they would do it. I think that's one of those things that they just look at. But that's fine. It's different. It's a different sport now than when it once was. But I think that if we're talking about if we break down each round as a micro season, then yeah, it probably is going to have a Bristol in there, and then yeah, you got the next races in the next round there will be kind of maybe be the one where championship favorites still kind of separate themselves from everybody else.
And I misspoke. Actually, the golf tournament is next week. It's not the week of Bristol, so I actually am going to be able to watch it.
Oh,
Anyway,
there you go. Okay.
the round of 12 begins with the track that you got to see the closest finish in NASCAR history at. If you want to hear what he had to say about that, you can go back and watch Napa Sports News. Brock has his whole spiel on that. We're gonna bring him back into it on it now. Like we had a great race in Kansas this year. That is the start of the round of 12, Brock. Like how
That's
great is
exciting.
that?
That's exciting. I really enjoyed my time there at the track there this year, and of course, yeah, the photo finish at the end there just absolutely capped it off there. Seeing it was interesting, kind of walking up that pit road and kind of noticing the photo finish camera, and I always kind of had checked that out from one track to the next. Like, I wonder if they're going to need to use that this week or not. This is definitely the first one, at least that I've been to, that's been anywhere near that close. That was great, great venue there. Great fans, met a lot of people. There were a lot of people that are viewers of the Last Car website, and the videos on my channel are in that area. So I got to meet quite a few of them out there, and that was a lot of fun.
And
Uh,
Brad Keselowski.
and Kislowski, yep, that was a big surprise. Yeah, I'm sure I already bored you with this back in the last show there, but yeah, he just, it was during that rain delay. I was just kind of walking in the garage area, and he and Chris Buescher were about the only drivers that were still standing there in the infield. I was just going to get kind of some candid pictures of them to put on the Twitter, and then right when I'm taking the second picture to get a little closer to Brad, he kind of looks up. He's like, "Hey, I know you." And I thought for sure he's talking. I mean, every time I've been in a situation like that, it's like, oh, he must be talking about somebody behind me. And it's like, no, I was like, yeah, he's over here. And yeah, we just had a wonderful conversation. Had a follow up even at Sears Point there too.
Yes, I remember that.
That was cool. So yeah, great guy. I mean, Keselowski is definitely very old school with his family's involvement in the sport, and that just made it more special. And then of course, yeah, having his team nearly pull off the win. It's unfortunate that Busher wasn't able to join Keselowski in the playoffs this year. I mean, that one and the Darlington win, and even when we were at Sears Point, Busher led a lot of
Hmm.
laps in that event.
Hmm.
Probably the three that really got away this year, but that's the way the game is played.
I mean, you can make the argument that Martin Truex Jr. should have had a few wins too. If you remember at the end of our race in Sonoma,
Yep.
it was Truex and Busher, but Larson was running them out of gas, and poor
Mhm.
Truex.
Just can't
Poor,
find a
Tr-
break, man.
poor Truex. He has not had a good last eight little stretch here.
At
I don't
least
know what
Truex made it
to.
in though. So I mean, even with the crash on the third lap of the Southern 500 there, so
I don't
yeah,
know what to make of Truex in the playoffs. Like, sure, the guy is still capable of winning anywhere.
sure.
He's that good, but he has not been performing on all cylinders. So, like, I don't know what to make of him in the playoffs. What are your thoughts on Truex? And is with it because these are his final 10 races of the year of his
I
career
mean, it's gonna be
full
tricky.
time.
It's gonna be tricky. I think if he can get through this first round, I mean, I know that people are expecting. It's like, okay, well, look, we all know. Like people seem pretty sure about who's going to be eliminated this round because yeah, you got Harrison Burton, you got Austin Cindric, and you
Chase
got
Briscoe
Chase Briscoe in there, and they're like, well, okay, they're going to be wiped out. But even if that's the case, you still got that fourth spot, and yeah, who's that going to be? I mean,
could be Suarez.
is it going to be Suarez? Is it going to be Truex? Is it going to be Ty Gibbs? Or is one of them gonna, punch their ticket in these first couple of rounds? Again, I'm not a big fan of the playoff system, but I'll admit that's an intriguing story. And to answer your question, yeah, I don't know. I think this first round is going to be what's going to tell us. And I know that sounds like kind of a cop out, but I think if Truex gets through this first round, maybe he gets his feet under him, and he's been through this enough times that he knows what he needs to do to get to each round. He can get to Kansas and be a favorite there. Although I've seen him, he's had some bad runs there too. But I mean, you get to be that long in your career, you'll have good runs and bad runs everywhere at that point. I think if he can get, he can get from there. I mean, who knows what happens?
It's also worth pointing out that Truex is a former winner at Watkins Glen, albeit it was in the Gen 6 era. He's only got one road course win in the next gen era. That was 2022 Sonoma. No, 2023 Sonoma. 2022 Sonoma was Daniel Suarez,
There you
who
go.
is also capable of winning on a road course. But Martin Truex, I don't know. We'll see. Another one, this playoff field is very interesting. Tyler Reddick really got hot at the end of the season.
Yes.
What did you notice about his consistency? I mean, he would have won. He'd probably be leading the points in a lot of old school points formats at this point. Like, the guy is really just hitting on all cylinders at this moment. Like, what do you think that team found after the Olympics to where they've just been on a roll?
I'd argue that it happened even earlier this year. I remember
Hmm.
getting some criticism earlier this year on social media when I was saying that Reddick really had Larson's number at the end of that Las Vegas race in the spring.
Hmm.
He was tracking him down, and everybody's like, "Oh, it wasn't even close." It's like that's not what it looked like to me. I
I
thought he,
was there.
yeah,
I was
well,
there. He was, yeah, he was. You got me?
whoop, uh-oh, I think I unplugged my mic.
Tech,
Oh, yep, there it is.
technical difficulties.
Technical
Anyway,
difficulty. I think I popped this out of there.
I was at the Las Vegas spring race, and yes,
Man,
what you saw on TV was correct. Reddick was eating into him every second, and he probably needed like two more laps to win that race. So,
there you go.
and we've got Vegas in the playoffs again. Like granted, and this is the news that I have. I will be going to the Vegas fall race for the third straight
Ooh,
Las
fantastic.
Vegas race in a year in the last 2 years. So I'm looking forward to doing my second ever NASCAR playoff race. We have friends in Vegas, my photographer and I, so that's part of the reason why we go.
Oh,
But
that's a great idea.
it's also a great vacation. Um, and it's also worth noting that next year there could be something else added that fans may like, and that is the Kubota High Limit Sprint Cars Larson and Brad Sweet series could be in conjunction with them in one of the races next year. That's a rumor. So I'm not going to
Okay.
go any more beyond that, but
Hey, we'll see.
yeah, it's a great show, and I'm a racing fan, so I would go and check that stuff out easily. Anyway, back to the point at hand, the NASCAR playoffs. Larson, he just missed the regular season championship by 1 point. Was it him choosing to run the Indy 500? What was it? I mean, he's pointed out numerous different things where he could have made up that 1 point or 2 points, however much he needed to not be in that situation.
I mean, it's easy to second guess that. I mean, literally, if he even finished last at the 600, that and that was not going to be possible by the time, say that last rainstorm didn't come through, and he takes over for Allgaier in 13th, and he already got, I think we had like two or three cars out at that point. Yeah, I mean, that would have made the difference right there. But again, there's only so much you can do, and I think Larson's plenty practiced enough at the playoffs right now. I mean, he's had some dominant runs where it looks like he's unstoppable. He's had some moments of surprising fragility, like that costly mistake at Homestead last year,
Hmm.
with him getting into the sand barrels there at Homestead. I mean, he's not infallible, and it could definitely happen there again. But I think you could look at the 15 bonus points in one direction or another. If it's like insurance you need to hopefully get to the end if you're not entirely sure of yourself, or if it's something where yeah, I mean you can be anywhere in the point standings and maybe get a Tony Stewart 2011 like rally and just stomp your way through the rest of the field there and just let the points take care of themselves.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to see what Larson does here. And then also it's just going to be very interesting because we've mentioned the guys that could be on the bottom. Like Byron hasn't shown much consistency ever since the summer, but he does
I'm
this. The
worried
team
about him. Yeah.
this team does go into hibernation, and it's weird because like they win their races in the spring part of the season, the Fox schedule, and then just go dormant. It's weird. I don't understand what's going on there.
Yeah, no, I had to remind my brother about that. He's like, "Oh yeah, he's won like what 5 races this year." It's like, no, he hasn't won since that 40th anniversary race in Martinsville, and that was back in April, and that was a long time ago. And that's like, yeah, there's. I remember Jimmy Johnson used to do this in the old Chase era to an extent. It's like they would storm off. They get like it wouldn't necessarily win the first couple races of the year, except the times he won the 500. But then usually by like March, April, he starts just winning just everything in sight. He win like 5 or 6 races. Then you get to like July and August, and all of a sudden their performance just drops off a cliff. They start crashing a lot. They start blowing some engines, and then September comes. They're just right back into the old format before. They just cruised over everybody else. I think they won at least three of their the 5 championships in a row doing that. 6 and 7 were a little different from that, but that was it wouldn't surprise me if Hendrick maybe still has that notebook and is doing something with it. That could be one aspect of it. But even if that is the case, I'm still a little concerned because Byron, it seemed like, especially from last year, and that was kind of, you know, it certainly felt like his best year to that point. Them regressing a bit here, and even to the point where Alex Bowman has now won in that
Hmm.
same losing streak. I mean, it's like, man, it's like, what is going on here? I don't even really remember what he did at Sears Points. So like, yeah,
Yeah. I think Byron qualified in the top 10 at Sonoma and then was like non-factor the whole day. So,
yeah. I
but
don't think I remember even. I don't think I even took a picture of the car during the race.
and then you mentioned Bowman. Like, how great was it that he got back to victory lane and punched his ticket to the playoffs with
Oh, good for
the
him.
win at Chicago? Like, I was so happy about that. Granted, I was covering a baseball tournament that I will be doing again next year during that same time. But how great was it for Bowman to get a win? It showed that he's been a good driver this whole time, but he just needed to win again to show that he can it deserves that car.
It's such a brutal time in the sport. I mean, the sport's it's always been an aspect of the sport, but now it's magnified so much more. I mean, the what have you done for us lately scenario. You can have a driver that in his case, what qualified on the front row for the Daytona for like what, 5, 6 straight years,
Uh-huh.
something like that. Took over for Dale Jr. under a really high pressure situation, still was pulling off wins, winning it either the swan song for certain tracks or anything else in between there. Just having a maybe not the flashiest career, but definitely a respectable career, not not being, and then also remembering even before all of that when he was struggling driving for Tommy Baldwin or BK Racing and earning his stripes. He's had quite the journey to get to this point. But the problem is in racing is that really the evaluation is what you are doing now, what you've done lately. Just mentioning it just now about William Byron. I mean, again, talented driver, should could and would be a championship contender, but it's concerning in just these few weeks. And that's another consequence of this playoff system. That if you fall off a little bit, the system is completely unforgiving, and the punishment for it is way worse. You can on a full season thing, you can be in a situation where maybe you kind of drop off a little bit at the end of the year. Maybe you're still second and third in points because you had such a good strong start to the year. Now, I mean, if you're in the top 16, you get eliminated in that first round, you just hit that glass ceiling and you can't get any higher. Then everybody sees you 13th in points at the end of the year. It's like, what the heck happened here? But that's just where it is, and I think that's kind of leaked down to a lot of drivers. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Ty Gibbs has felt this pressure from not winning a race yet. Used to be winning your first race if it took 5, 6 years. I mean, Dale Jarrett was kind of in that situation before he won in '91. You're not going to lose your ride, or and if you do, maybe you're going to end up in a better one because I see the potential in you. Now it's about hanging on to what you got because you end up in the top ride at the beginning, and then who knows what's going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, Bowman has definitely ridden both sides of that escalator, I think, and it's that's definitely another example of it.
It's worth noting that Bowman has made it to the round of eight though in the past. So
Right.
has Chase Elliott, who is also in the playoffs this year. All the Hendrick guys I have going to the round of eight. I think they're all two like even if Bowman or Byron, whoever you want to say is the worst team, they're still a minus B team compared to all the other
That's
teams that
fair.
are still in there. Like they are one of those are probably four of the best eight teams, assuming nothing wonky happens, but that's the playoffs, so we shall see. Um, the last thing before we talk about that is we have had some silly season moves take place recently. The most recent of which is Shane Van Gisbergen, who you hit on earlier, going to Trackhouse full time to drive the 88. The 88 is coming back to the NASCAR Cup Series with Trackhouse Racing. What are your thoughts on Shane SVG going full time Cup racing next year?
Yeah, I mean, might as well bring it on. I mean, sometimes when you're on the rise and you've already won a few races, yeah, they're all road courses, but that's pretty much what people were expecting coming into this year. Yeah, I mean, give him another try at it. I mean, and I think we're working off a new script here at this point when the guy wins in his Cup Series debut, something that hasn't happened in decades, depending on what your measure of it is, whether it's a qualifying race or or as a road course ringer or anything else in between. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth trying. I don't think it's going to do any damage to his career, especially if you've already won. It's just a matter of trying to kind of, find your way back and see how many more times you can do it. I don't think he's been. I think that the concern going into this year was how he was performing at these other tracks, how he's going to adjust to running ovals. But I think this last week, I think in particular, when he ran as well as he did in the Darlington Xfinity race in just a second start there, I mean, arguably, I would say one of the most, if not the most difficult tracks on the circuit. track's so notorious that you had architects from Japan come over here and use it as their model to build the Motegi Oval. Yeah, I mean that's quite the accomplishment, and I think that's there have been drivers that have got cup rides for way less than that. And I think it's certainly worth a try. Him running the 88, I'm definitely among those that's not as crazy about that. I mean, to me, 88 is still Dale Jarrett. I don't get as hung up on the Dale Jr. thing as much on that part of it there. But I've heard that it sounds like there was a lot of I mean, I'm sure it wasn't a decision made lightly. And I heard some reference that I guess it was to the 888 number that was running um, the V8 supercars out there, and honoring that. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool. Obviously not going to run triple numbers in NASCAR, otherwise they probably would have picked that. As fun as that would be. That's it's an interesting choice, but as to him actually being in the Cup Series, no, I don't have any problem with it, and I think it's another wonderful vindication for every road course specialist that's come and gone over the years, trying to even get a good finish, never mind a win, never mind a full-time ride.
We saw SVG dominate the race at Sonoma in the Xfinity Series this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing
Beautiful.
him be back at full time and him being full time in Cup. And while we're on the topic of SVG, there is a rumor out there that he's going to run the Chili Bowl Nationals with Trackhouse Racing in
Oh,
January in Tulsa because he's ran midgets before in the past over in New Zealand, being that that's a hub for dirt racing. He's also going to race a sprint car when the NASCAR season off season is over. Trackhouse Racing is all behind this, so it, the comparisons to Kyle Larson are starting to become more and more similar with this guy as more and more information comes out. And I'm all for it. Like Brock, I'm a dirt fan too. So
sure.
the fact that SVG is doing all this different stuff is awesome to me, and I wish him the best in all of it.
Oh yeah, same here. I think it's fantastic, and I think any, as much as I've been critical of drivers that run in like the lower series, like Xfinity or trucks, when they've already got a cup ride. I mean, I get the impulse that they want to just drive as many things as possible, and obviously this is a very different situation here. Him now getting a full-time cup ride and then looking into dirt racing and not lower series by any measure, just completely different disciplines and trying to practice their hand at that. That's exciting. That's great. That's where you get drivers like Ken Schrader and Kyle Larson and others over the years that have been, Tony Stewart, drivers that have been
Hmm.
multidisciplinary drivers. It's a small but elite group of drivers, and I think that the best of the best, they really want to challenge themselves. And I think that I'm glad that he's willing to do that, and I'm also glad that Trackhouse is willing to help him accomplish that. Because I'm sure that they want to make sure that they're investing in him. They want to give him the best equipment they can and stuff, and give him the best shot at doing what he wants to do. So I think that's great.
Well, it's funny because I've always viewed the Chili Bowl as kind of the preseason rust breakoff. You get NASCAR guys, you get NHRA guys, you get a bunch of guys from different disciplines of racing, and it's kind of just like that preseason, let's get back into racing mode. So I think this is a great idea if SVG does do that. Anyway, we'll put the bow on that for now. The other side of this hand though is Zane Smith. He is no
Mhm.
longer with Trackhouse, and he's free to look at any other rides. I'm thinking he's going to end up at Front Row Racing, given that Michael McDowell's already gone. Like basically, like I would love to see Zane Smith in the Cup Series still. He's shown that he's worthy of it. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Zane has been, I'd say, one of the most improved drivers from this season. I mean, he had some pretty solid runs coming into this year. Again, as you mentioned, with Front Row Motorsports and such there, separate from his Truck Series championship, but
Mhm.
actually in some Cup races there. But yeah, I mean, whatever happened going into Nashville when he had that runner-up finish to Logano there in quadruple overtime or whatever it was. He's really just kind of found his rhythm. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the parts were already in motion by the time that even happened. And so, the rug kind of got pulled out from under him there. But yeah, I agree. I think if he finds a ride with anybody, if he gets a team that, I mean, again, the Spire 71 effort was, not really, I'd say, one of the top rides in the field there either. What he's been able to accomplish with it, joining, Carson Hocevar in the top 10 at Michigan, even leapfrogging him in the closing laps of that race. Was solid at Daytona. I mean, had some other good runs there too. That's really cool to see, and I think, given how much he struggled at the beginning of the year, it's vindicating to see him really make that adjustment because I mean, this car has not been that easy of an adjustment for a lot of these different drivers coming up through the ranks. And we've seen some struggle with it so much that they still haven't figured it out here in our third season running this car. Even guys that were full time in the Gen 6 car for a number of years. I mean, Briscoe's a perfect example with
Hmm.
finally pulling off this first win here and since 2022. So yeah, I agree. I think if he finds a ride in Cup, I think it would be great. I don't think you're going to hear a lot of people complain about that.
And the thing is, still don't know who is going to be driving the Spire Motorsports 7, with Rodney Childers at the helm of it. We know Corey LaJoy won't be back, which is kind of sad, but that's a ride that I think is the biggest question mark in racing right in NASCAR right now because we really don't know who's going to have that ride.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's one of those ones. Excuse me. Long day at work today. But yeah, the situation there with him. I know there was some rumblings about like, was that something Kyle Busch was looking at? If things didn't work out at Childress, now he's had these back-to-back runner-up finishes. So has that changed the complexion of that? Obviously Kyle won the truck race with Spire, which was basically his team anyway,
Hmm.
after we got sold over to him. Yeah, I mean, who's going to be on the market and who's really looking for a ride and who's really not happy with their current arrangement? Um, Tough to say. Tough to say. If I would say after New Hampshire, where Kyle just hit everything but the jackpot there on the track there, I'd probably say, oh yeah, he's gonna be the clear favorite. But now after these last few weeks, I'm not so sure because kind of like what happened with Zane after Nashville, even with how that Richmond race turned out, regardless, Dylan and Kyle Busch seem like they've really improved these last couple of weeks. Maybe very late in the stretch run here, and too late, unfortunately, to get another win for Dylan to get back into the playoffs.
Hmm.
But it still seems like they're on an upward slide, and maybe that's going to be an effect there too. So, uh, when things are that much up in the air, I mean, you could always even think about somebody that's an outsider, somebody that has is in the Xfinity or maybe Truck Series that could really make a try for it. Not exactly sure whose contract is up there, but it's a possibility. I think one driver that I'm going to be kind of curious about, you mentioned, and also with front row as well, when you discuss this, was Riley Herbst for how
Hmm.
impressive he was at the Talladega Cup race last year. Should have won that even days before he won the Xfinity race in Vegas. I've been very impressed with him, especially on the super speedways. He'd already had a top 10 at Daytona. Yeah, there was some big field clearing wreck on the final lap, but he still had to get through it. So, I think he's one of the pieces that I know there's a Haas factory team and what he's locked in with or what he was offered at least with that. But maybe that's another piece that still needs to be figured out.
And then lastly, on the Spire part, we had Carson Hocevar, who has really figured it out. I think he's their franchise. Clearly, I mean, we haven't heard any news on him. I would say that's a good thing
Yeah, I don't
because
think he's going anywhere.
he's really figured it out, and he's been doing more than what that car is capable of, which to me is a really good driver.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he had a bit of a struggle at the beginning of the year. He got last in the 500. Wasn't his fault. Just got swept up in something else. But he's been, right up there, getting some top tens, getting some surprising runs. I think there were some that were concerned after the Truck Series race last year that he was going to be a bit of a bulldozer and running over people out there. There have been some scuffles, along the way, and you would expect that from a rookie driver, but I wouldn't say anything, really that egregious, Austin Dillon caliber from this year. So we'll see how things shake out there.
And then you mentioned the Haas factory team. They have announced their Xfinity drivers are going to be Sheldon Creed and Sam Mayer. That is, and Cole Custer is going to be in their Cup Series car. So, I
Very
mean, kind
interesting
of
lineup.
that's a very interesting team to me. Is this kind of just a foot in the door thing, or is Gene Haas getting his way at? Like, that's what I'm most intrigued going into next year with what's going on there. But nonetheless, Sheldon Creed and Sam Mayer, like two guys who you thought like their current situations, but they're both leaving. That's bizarre to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's I'm thinking Sheldon Creed is probably looking ahead of the curve here. Maybe I'm still feel like the planets seem to be aligning just like they did for Daniel Hemrick when he didn't win and then still made the championship four and then won that Phoenix race. I kind of feel like that 18 car, much like the 21 had for Harrison Burton, may have a little bit of magic in there. And maybe he just kind of finds his way to Phoenix. And if he does, I'd have a hard time betting against him. But yeah, I mean, there's other parts that are always moving at Joe Gibbs. It seems like the Gibbs team is having a terrible time keeping a hold of really any driver that they've had there. I mean, if you have Kyle
Just got
Busch,
Brandon Jones
perfect.
today. Brandon
Yeah,
Jones
they
is
get
going
him
back.
back. Yeah, so I mean, what's going on there? I mean, I think it was about as surprising as Allmendinger going back to full-time Cup for
Oh
Kaulig.
yeah,
I mean,
didn't hit
there's
on
a
that
lot of
either.
yeah. I mean, you got people just kind of going back, and you didn't think that the like you thought either the bridge was burned or maybe they didn't even feel like crossing it. But I guess that's something that could always change. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. I think that'll be interesting. But I'm intrigued by the Haas Factory team too. Anything with like it's not technically a new team, but it's definitely a reorganized team.
Hmm.
If anything, it's kind of bringing back a team that we haven't seen in a while, which is the pre 2009 Haas effort. Back when they ran two Cup cars. Of course, now it's just gonna be the one Cup car, but yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to find out.
And then Carson Quapple's going to Junior Motorsports, which is going to be very interesting. That's also a fun one. What other ones were announced? You mentioned AJ Allmendinger to Colleague, but on top of that, we also have Daniel Dye driving the 10, and we
Yep.
also have Christian Eckes driving the 16. He's getting the promotion up from the Truck Series, which is awesome to see. That's the whole point of the developmental series. I love to see that stuff.
Oh
He can
yeah.
drive. He can drive too. That's the thing that people don't realize. Like he did not necessarily get a fair shake at things when he was at KBM, and now he's really grown as a driver, and I think he's earned this opportunity.
Yep. Yep. I was glad you mentioned the KPM era because I remember watching. I think it was Sears Point weekend. He was running a truck race at Gateway, and he either qualified well or he was leading some laps there. Didn't win, the race at the time there, but I mean, it was something. It's like, wow. I mean, this Eckes guy could be the real deal. But I mean, again, like you see with a lot of these drivers, had to take kind of the long way to get there and get a different arrangement there to kind of find where he's most comfortable. And it's great to see because him and Corey Heim have pretty much had the measure of the Truck Series field this year.
I would imagine Corey Heim gets an Xfinity ride at some point. I mean, the
Oh,
guy is too talented to not
yeah.
next year be in the Xfinity series. That's just my
And
opinion.
he did a very respectable job filling in for Eric Jones as well. I know, he was a little bummed to not have his Cup debut be in a car with his name on the front, on the side of it there. But I mean, being able to drive a Richard Petty throwback at Dover was, I think, it's a pretty good follow up to that. I still don't understand why that didn't reach MOQ at Lionel, but go figure. That's the, it's, yeah. I mean, Heim will find a good ride for sure. I have faith in that.
It's been all so those are just some of the changes since we last talked in May. It's been that long since we last talked, Brock. We talked on Memorial Day, and
Yep.
now it's the day after Labor Day.
I got
So
Labor
it's
Day.
been
Yeah.
it's
We go from
been
one holiday to the next.
it's been a few months here, and this is, like I said, a rarity that we get to do this twice in one year. So I appreciate you doing this. Lastly,
Oh,
I'll give you the floor. Where can people find you? Obviously, you got your website hat on. I love the promote self promotion there.
oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. Oh, thank you for having me on. Yeah, my website is lastcar.info. My Twitter is at lastcaronbrock. Patreon is patreon.com/lastcaronbrock. And the website is lastcar.info. That is main hub for all my material, including my books, JD, story of JD McDuffie, and Cope on Derek Cope. Got some other, bonuses. If you want a hat like this, I got those in my eBay store as well. All of it's on the lastcar.info page.
And yep, and my like I said, I will be doing live race coverage from Vegas here in the fall.
Look forward
Up
to
at,
it.
up until then, you can find all my work at napasportsnews.com. I've got high school sports galore right now, Brock. That's the time of year we are in here, and that's where the money is made. So, got to do that
Fantastic.
while I can. But got to have that NASCAR vacation in October just to get away for a week. So kind of important. Anyway, thank you as always for joining me. This is always great to do.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yep, we will chat later, my friend.